Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. Some of you might remember that a few months back, I made a video about Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, and the various story problems that I have with it. I still agree with pretty much everything I said in that video, but something I didn't get to touch on was what I think is going to happen next. I had planned out a section where I talk about possible theories for where everything is going, but it kind of broke the flow of things, so I ended up cutting it and decided to make a dedicated video sometime later, which is what you're watching right now. Today we'll be talking about various theories I have about Poppy Playtime and what will happen in the future of the game. It's a pretty simple video premise, so I'll get right into it, but I want to make the expectations clear here. This is not a video of game theory type predictions. Some of these theories have evidence, but most of them are just based on vibes and gut feeling. Realistically, there are going to be some that are wrong, and there's even some that I hope turn out to be wrong, which we'll get into later. I just want to make it clear from the top that these theories are not necessarily meant to convince you of what is going to happen. I'm kind of making this video just in case I'm secretly a genius and get everything right, so I can have evidence to show that this is what I thought from the beginning, which I hope is going to be enjoyable for you all to listen to. If you like what I'm doing and want to hear more, I have a special request for you. Last video I asked people to press the hype button, which went exceedingly well. Thank you all so much, that was incredible. But the data that me and my husband collected on how it affects things algorithmically wasn't really conclusive, so we're gonna try something else this time. Please comment under this video just the word data, D-A-T-A. If you were gonna comment anyway, just include it somewhere in there. We're just trying to see how many people, respond to calls to action, and maybe comments will boost things more than hypes will, but yeah, if you guys could do that, me and my analytics-loving husband would very much appreciate it. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy the video, and let's get into the first red string theory we have for today, which is all the orphans that originally survived the Hour of Joy are dead and have been dead for years. As Poppy Playtime has progressed as the game, I hadn't really put much thought into the orphans of Playcare. We're arriving 10 years after some horrible disappearance, and everyone refers to them in the past tense, so it's not a stretch to say that they might not be around. Then in Chapter 3, we found out that they hadn't been killed in the Hour of Joy, but that didn't really matter to me. It's still been 10 years, and even though the giant monsters didn't kill them outright, I found it hard to believe that they were still around when we got there. Because what would they have been doing this whole time? Well, according to Chapter 4, sleeping is what they've been doing this whole time. Which I don't think I need to tell you is kind of a wild thing to say. 4 chapters into this game, and we find out that the super secret goal of all this was to save the children. It feels a little late to be introducing those kinds of stakes, and maybe this is gonna sound a little flippant and callous, but why would the prototype keep them alive until now? Let's say that Poppy was being weirdly metaphorical and the orphans have just been living and growing up down in the labs. I don't think the prototype has the patience necessary to care for and raise as many as a dozen young children. Especially not if there's something like, I don't know, a giant food shortage and people are starving. It's hard for me to imagine that they'd just be fine and dandy down there. Alternatively, if sleeping is supposed to imply some sort of coma or cryostasis, then that just raises more questions. Sure, research into cryogenics would technically be in line with the idea of living forever that Poppy is going for, and you could probably make it Poppy Playtime themed by making it Poppy Gel like we've seen before. But if Playtime Co. managed to do this successfully, then why did they even bother with all the unethical child experimentation? Playtime Co. supposedly used the bigger bodies as free labor because the business was failing, but if they had an actual way to make cryogenics a reality, I genuinely believe they could have sold that technology and had enough money to buy their own company several times over. I mean, technically they couldn't have, because as soon as they did, all their crimes against humanity would come to light, and they would have been sent to jail, and all their property would have been confiscated by the FBI, but that's a conversation for another day. The point is, claiming that the children have been secretly alive and fine this whole time is just something that I can't bring myself to believe without taking a serious leap in logic. And therefore, I don't believe that's what's actually going on. So what is actually going on? Poppy seemed pretty sincere, like she genuinely believes that the children are fine and we need to make sure to save them before we blow up the factory. But that's the thing. Poppy might believe the orphans are fine, but as we've learned, Poppy is not working with reliable information. She spent who knows how many years stuck in a box, and all her time before and after that, she was relying on someone who turned out to be her biggest enemy in disguise. We don't know exactly how long the prototype was impersonating Ollie, or how long Poppy was relying on him for information, but based on this conversation, we can assume that it's a pretty significant amount of time. And I think at some point in that time, the prototype lied to Poppy about what happened to the orphans. The prototype cares about Poppy, even if it's in a weird, possessive kind of way. His conversations with her as Ollie show this very plainly, and the fact that he's been Ollie this whole time kind of means that he was just letting Poppy go off and do her own thing for who knows how long. He's the one who put her in that
god-awful case for so long.
At one point, he had her completely at his mercy, but he didn't kill her. He treats her more like a misbehaving child, annoying him with her antics. He thinks she's causing a lot of trouble, but he also wants her to be happy and feel safe. So, if at some point Poppy called to ask how Ollie and the other orphans were doing, and things weren't going very well, it's entirely in character for the prototype to just lie to her, to tell her that everything is fine, they're all just sleeping, safe and sound. And isn't that something people say to a child they think can't handle bad news? Fido's getting old, so we're sending him to a super fun park upstate. Isn't that nice? Auntie Sarah is fine, she just moved far away so we can't see her anymore. It's okay, Poppy, don't be upset. The prototypes put everyone in some kind of trance, like they're sleeping. So they can't talk to you, but they're all okay, I promise. To be clear, I'm not trying to imply that the orphans actually did die during the Hour of Joy or something like that. We know from Chapter 3 that they at least survived the initial event and were probably passed to the prototype by catnap. After that, though, things are very uncertain. I personally believe that, unfortunately, this group of children just slowly died one by one as the prototype was unable to care for them properly. Taking care of kids is difficult even in the best circumstances, and these were not the best circumstances. I already mentioned the lack of food, but that's only one of the many problems they would have been facing. I actually initially had this really dark theory that the prototype was just slowly eating them over the years, but then I remembered that apparently the prototype doesn't need to eat, so that was kind of out the window. But honestly, that supports my interpretation too. It's kind of hard to keep someone fed when you don't remember what hunger feels like. Putting it bluntly, I just don't find it believable for the orphans to still be alive. Or maybe it's better to say I just don't like the idea of them still being alive. I feel like having them all be totally fine in the basement really undermines the tone that this story is going for. Poppy Playtime has the potential to be a very dark and harrowing story, but it always feels like it's holding back from doing anything too bad. Doughy and Catnap were children subjected to horrible experiments and forced to live out their lives as giant monsters, but we're going to give them the most deep and distorted voices possible so you don't have to think too hard about the fact that you're killing them. We've established that the lower level is going to be full of the eaten remains of hundreds of employees, but we don't want it to be too grisly, so we're just gonna fill a room with sort of mummified clones in weird positions and call it good. This company caused the suffering and death of hundreds, including these innocent orphans, but maybe that's a little too much, actually, so the orphans were fine this whole time, and you're able to save them in the next chapter. I promise I'm not saying any of this to try and be mean or disparaging. I'm sure that if the orphans are in some sort of cryo-sleep, there could be some cool set pieces and world building that comes out of it. I just don't want the game to walk back on its darker elements because it's supposedly aimed at a younger audience. So until proven otherwise, I'm going to say that the orphans all died and Poppy's gonna be feeling very betrayed and distraught about it. From here we'll be moving on to our next theory, which is less theory and more trying to answer a question that's been here for a long time. And that question is... who exactly do we play as in Poppy Playtime? I mentioned in my previous video that the game is pretty vague when it comes to this. Characters acknowledge that we worked here, but they also don't seem to recognize us. This might make you think that our identity isn't important, but I would disagree. If we're meant to interpret the player character as a random, unlucky worker, the developers wouldn't feel the need to have major villains continue to question why we're here 4 chapters in. Clearly, who we are is meant to be important in some way. And even though we don't have a lot to go on, I do think it's possible to narrow things down a bit. Based on the nightmares in Chapter 3, we know that our character is haunted by guilt. Plenty of characters have made assumptions about why we're here, but this is something concrete. These dreams take place inside our character's head, and because our character doesn't talk, this is really the only insight we get into what we're doing and why. And it's clear that we feel guilty about something, enough that it consumes us and drove us to come back here. And based on what little we see in the dream, it probably has to do with the Bigger Bodies initiative. It's unclear if we were directly involved or more just complicit in a system, but either way, it eats us up inside. But there's a specific moment in the dream sequence that I think changes the context for everything. A moment that I'm genuinely shocked isn't brought up more in theories. Throughout the first nightmare sequence, there's a story playing over the radio. In this looping hallway, a backwards message is playing, and it reframes the entire context of our character's guilt.
I find your presence intrusive. Time you return. You come in here and you kill and murder. You pillage and destroy. Your presence was demanded 10 years ago and you didn't show up. 8/8/1995. You were supposed to be here. Why weren't you here? You missed the event. You missed the meeting. You missed the party. You have no right to be here. 8/8/1995.
At first, this might not seem like much. You could read this as our character simply feeling confused, knowing that they missed something on this day because that's when everyone disappeared. But I think it's more than that. Remember, this is taking place in our own subconscious. And the way that it talks about what happened makes me think that our character knew about the hour of joy before it happened. Not only did they know about it, they had a direct role to play in it that they never showed up for. Pay attention to how this is described. The hour of joy is an event, a meeting, a party. Do you know what those things have in common? They're things you're invited to. This is something important that you were supposed to be there for. If this was just about the monsters being mad they couldn't kill us, this could have been left as, you were supposed to be there. If we were just scared or confused about what happened on this date, it likely would have just been cryptic about what could have happened. But no, our presence was demanded all those years ago, We knew that something was happening. We had a role to play, and we didn't show up. And this, I think, is the guilt that haunts us. Our character might feel guilty about their involvement overall, sure, but what eclipses that feeling is the knowledge that we were supposed to help these children get their revenge. And for some reason, we didn't. We feel guilty because we had the opportunity to help, and for whatever reason, we decided to turn away. And the fact that we have the gall to show up again after all these years is sickening, even to ourselves. Our presence is intrusive, we are causing harm, but our guilt drives us to continue, to somehow make up for what we did. Or maybe in this case, what we didn't do. Given this new context, there are some people who could fit, one of them being Stella Graber. Stella became part of the core group responsible for the experiments, but she was always clearly the most conflicted about it. Throughout everything, she held on to her empathy, even though doing it could have been pretty dangerous for her. She agrees to join convincingly enough, but there are several points where it's clear that her sympathy for others is putting her on thin ice.
Those poor people. Did we really have to—
We did what was necessary, Miss Graber.
Of course.
I think Stella probably wanted to adapt to the situation and ignore the atrocities for the sake of the greater good, but she could never quite make herself as cold and uncaring as the others. And if she was completely against it, what was she supposed to do? She'd just been shown the full extent of Playtime Co.'s rotten underbelly. You don't get to see that unless someone's prepared to get rid of you. So she's stuck and trying to make the best of it. Unless someone such as the prototype offered her a way out. From her position, Stella would have had easy access to the prototype, and given her hesitation, it's entirely believable that she could have agreed to work with him on the Hour of Joy. And then at some point, maybe because she didn't actually want to murder all her coworkers, she backed out of whatever role she was meant to play, and it's only years later that the guilt has finally become loud enough to bring her back. Us being Stella makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons, but there are problems with it. First of all, it kind of implies that all the big problems of the story happened because a woman got emotional about it, which isn't great. But even besides that, thanks to Chapter 4, Stella is pretty definitively not the player character. And we know this because of Dr. Sawyer. We know that Stella and Harley had met before, with Stella saying that she's tried to set boundaries and been ignored. And in Chapter 4, Harley makes it clear that he doesn't recognize us. We could say this is because his memory was affected by his transformation, or he's secretly just super sexist and intentionally forgets the face of every woman he talks to, but it's much more likely that he's just never met us before, which means it can't be Stella or anyone else who worked closely with Dr. Sawyer, which leaves us with Richard Lovitz, or Rich for short. Rich was in charge of shipping for the company. This is an important job logistically, but it means that he probably didn't know the full extent of what the company was doing. It's almost certain that he knew something was going on, but he wouldn't have had any details. From what we can tell, he was kind of just using his limited power to look out for his employees.
Hey, no matter what the executives say, no matter the looks you get, just know that I've got your back, kid. Shipping is a family. We look out for each other. That's the way it is now. I fight for you. All of you. And I'm in a position where I can do so.
Despite his gruff exterior, he clearly cares a lot about them, and about the orphans, even though normal employees are not allowed to interact with them. If he found out the true extent of what was going on, you'd better believe he'd be willing to do something about it. In terms of how he got involved with planning the Hour of Joy, it's a bit less clear, since he wouldn't have easy access to the prototype the same way someone like Stella would. But if he was doing his own investigation, or if the prototype had some way of communicating over distance, then it's entirely possible they could have made contact at some point. However, despite this good start, us being rich also has its own problems. First of all, if he agreed to play a role in the Hour of Joy, why didn't he show up? He's always struck me as a loyal character, so it doesn't make much sense for him to back out. Or if he did back out, I think he would have been more confrontational about it, rather than just not showing up. But that's kind of the problem. I'm making theories about who we are based on how I think characters would act, on who would feel bad about being involved, and who'd be willing to plan the Hour of Joy in some way. But character writing is flexible. While consistent characterization is important, if you take the proper time to set things up, you can believably make a character do pretty much anything. And the idea that we worked with the prototype is based off of a specific interpretation of a backwards voice message, which I'm sure many of you interpret very differently than I do. In terms of actual hard evidence, there unfortunately isn't much to go on, because the games have been so cagey about this. Through the process of elimination and the small bit of characterization we get, I think it makes the most sense for us to be rich, but I don't have any way to prove that we play as him, and there's not really much we can do about that right now. But I'll just state for the record, I believe that we play as Rich Lovitz, the man in charge of Playtime Co.'s shipping. He's high enough in the company to have found some detail of what's happening, he's principled enough to want to do something about it, and it makes sense for him and the Doctor to never have met before. This doesn't match with everything, but I think it might be the closest we have right now. But regardless of who we end up being, there's another aspect of our character that I think is important. Why exactly are we here? I believe that we're currently here because we've secretly been working with the prototype this whole time. I do not have strong evidence for this. Everything I'm about to mention could just be a collection of unrelated details. But there is something weird going on between us and the prototype, and I think it's because we are secretly in cahoots. Everything we've done up until this point has directly or indirectly helped the prototype. Nearly every time we've killed the chapter villain, the prototype is already there, ready to collect the body for himself. This implies that he was right there, waiting for us to finish doing the job. This is something he expected and wanted to happen. Mommy Longlegs and Catnap only die because we were there to lead them into a trap. And because of us, those loose ends are now tied up. Doughy's death is even more blatant than that. Doughy is canonically established to be the only reason that Safe Haven has stayed safe. He is the only toy who can stand up to the prototype physically. So the prototype doesn't confront him physically. He pulls on strings and creates just the right scenario where Doughy loses what keeps him attached and he goes off the rails. He perfectly creates a scenario where the biggest danger to him is dead and out of the way for good, all without him having to put himself in danger at any point. And if you think about it, this is what he could have been doing with the other chapter villains too. Mommy and Catnap weren't currently a problem, but they easily could have become one in the future. Everything that has happened all the way up to Chapter 4 has been part of the prototype's plan, and we are right in the middle of it. We still don't know who sent us that letter that drew us here, but I'm starting to think it might have been the prototype. The Doctor was working with the prototype and he mentions the letter while Poppy doesn't mention it at all, and seemingly thinks we returned without prompting. The misspellings in the letter don't really make sense for a character that's supposed to be this intelligent, but I honestly don't know who else could have sent it at this point. Of course, all of this being part of the prototype's plan doesn't necessarily mean that we were. This could just be an example of him pulling all the strings. but there is a direct connection between us and the prototype that I think is very weird. And it has to do once again with the Chapter 3 nightmare sequences, and something that has been happening to us all throughout the game. Every time you die, there's a bit of dialogue followed by the words, "Get up." This isn't that strange. Plenty of games have death screen tips and stuff like that. What is strange is this bit of dialogue appearing in the dream sequence.
Get up. Get up. Get up. Get up.
This is pretty clearly a reference to the death screens, but it is happening within a dream sequence that our character is having, which kind of implies that these death screens are happening somewhat diegetically, which I don't think needs to tell you has insane implications. There's also the fact that Ollie always puts a lot of emphasis on the mission, or the fact that we are the mission of other people, which I have no idea what he could be talking about if we're not working together. Like, he's reminding us of what we're supposed to be doing? Maybe? And this second dream sequence features the prototype so heavily with imagery that you really only have if you have some very strong opinions about someone's power level. I recognize that this is all very circumstantial and not at all solid, but something weird is going on, and the things we're doing line up with what the prototype wants just a little too well for it to be a coincidence. Yes, the prototype is smart, but the fact that we are directly responsible for taking out all his competition feels a little suspect. If I'm correct, and the guilt that haunts our character is related to us failing to play a part in the Hour of Joy, then we probably returned because we feel like we owe this place something. We let those children suffer, and now we're trying to make up for it. And wouldn't that be such an interesting inversion of the formula you usually see in Mascot Horror? Rather than the friendly character betraying us, we were secretly the traitor the whole time? I don't know. I just think that'd be a very interesting concept. Much more interesting than Poppy turning out to have betrayed us like the third time. Speaking of which, this one is not a very complicated theory, so I'll just be blunt. At this point, it would be very boring if Poppy turned out to be evil. She has already betrayed us once, and doing it again would not make it a better twist. It would just mean that it happened again. I will admit that some of the things she does is weird, and there are definitely things she's hiding. But when put all together, I don't think this means that she's secretly evil and out to get us. Instead, I think it means that she's someone who's used to getting her way and used to being the center of attention. In other words, she's not evil, she's just a bit of a brat. She might have good intentions, but she's a bit like an overbearing family member who always assumes she knows what's best for everyone without considering personal feelings. And there's not anyone around to tell her that, hey, maybe your plan isn't actually that great and we should explore other options. Doughy tries, but I think we all remember how well that went.
We've starved down here. We've been hunted. And now you're asking us to burn everything? All of us?
We'll talk about this later.
This isn't a terribly deep theory, but I do think it's an important one. Any weirdness from Poppy, I feel, just comes down to her being a traumatized experiment who's probably mentally in her teens, and who hasn't really interacted with a trusted adult for a while. She's definitely hiding something, but I don't think it's a secret prototype allegiance. That's what we're here for. And we are almost done with the theories I wanted to talk about at this point. We've gone over a lot of my thoughts and inclination of what might happen in the future, but there's one overarching idea that I haven't mentioned, mostly because this is the one I'm kind of hoping isn't true. And that's the idea that in some way, everything we're experiencing in the game is in some way not real. Poppy Playtime get compared to a lot of different games, and I've seen a lot of people compare other games to Poppy Playtime. And yet, the game that I think is the most similar to Poppy Playtime in structure always seems to escape the conversation, and that game is Bendy and the Ink Machine. Bendy and the Ink Machine was the pioneer for the chapter-by-chapter release, and the elevator pitch for both of these games is very similar. You receive a mysterious letter that summons you back to your old workplace. When you arrive, you find that it's become something much darker than you expected. And with each new chapter release, the game gets deeper and bigger with more questions and greater monsters facing you at every turn. All you can do is plunge forward and hope that you'll find answers at the end of this winding road. While Bendy and Poppy are obviously not direct copies of each other, they hit a lot of similar beats in a way that's almost uncanny. The progression and slow raising of the stakes, as well as specific interactions you have with characters, are remarkably similar even if they happen at slightly different times. But I don't think that's because Poppy is copying Bendy. Instead, I think these similarities are a symptom of the way these games were released, chapter by chapter over several years. I know that this type of release has become familiar to Mascot Horror fans, but how many games can you actually name off the top of your head that do this? There's Bendy, Poppy, and the up-and-coming Indigo Park. And also Garten of Banban, but I hate that game, so... Maybe I'm just out of the loop, but it seems like there's not a lot of games that actually go for this strategy, and I think there's a reason for that. At some point in the future, I might make a video about the pitfalls of the chapter-by-chapter format and how I think it can negatively impact a game, but for now, I'll just keep it short and talk about how it applies to Poppy Playtime's story specifically. When a game is released in parts like this, there's an unspoken expectation that every new part will be better than the last. This is good in a lot of ways. It encourages the developers to keep innovating, and it gives the audience something to be excited about. But it also makes for a very unsustainable development. It's not enough for a chapter to be as good as the previous one. It needs to be bigger, it needs to be more, it needs to knock your socks off. Keeping a consistent level of quality is not good enough when your entire business model is based on hype. And over time, this leads to your world and story starting to feel just a little bit unreal. The only way to make things bigger is to go down, to keep expanding. And the longer the game goes on, the more surreal and unbelievable that gets. We started out in an abandoned animation office, but now we're going through an entire theme park deep underground that's inexplicably remained undisturbed. What started out relatively grounded has grown completely out of control as each chapter is forced to one-up the last one. We saw this happening with Bendy, and now we're actively seeing it happen with Poppy. Throughout this whole video, there have been so many little things that don't add up quite right. Little things that are just slightly too out there to take at face value. I try to give the game grace a lot of the time, and this is a game about living giant toys, so you have to suspend your disbelief somewhat. But the fact is that it is unbelievable for there to have been an entire mining operation, a prison, and a lab running underneath Playtime Co. We all kind of know that's impossible, or at the very least, highly improbable. But, at least for now, we're willing to set aside realism because we are invested in this. We want to see what happens, see what kind of explanation we get for all this. And unfortunately, from that position as a writer, an incredibly easy solution to all this mess is to reveal that everything you've been seeing is a dream, or a hallucination, or a weird social experiment, or in the case of Bendy and the Ink Machine, a time loop pocket dimension. Poppy Playtime is reaching the same point that Bendy and the Ink Machine did. Things have gotten so surreal that it would be incredibly easy to claim that it was all in some way unreal, and any weirdness you noticed was actually clever foreshadowing and we definitely planned it the whole time. And this is something that I really hope Poppy Playtime does not do. It is very easy to say that it was all a dream, but you can believe me when I say that that would not be satisfying. And in fact, I think it's an incredibly lazy twist that often does nothing but make the audience feel stupid for ever caring about what was happening. There's a reason that Bendy's ending was so controversial when it happened. The game was essentially saying that all the effort you put into going through the game was for nothing, and that is never a good feeling. Now, do I think Poppy Playtime is going to do this? Is everything going to end up being a dream hallucination? Haha, it was never real reveal. At this point, I'm not sure. They could do that, but there's also a few things in Poppy Playtime's favor. So I could be worried for no reason. Bendy was pretty clearly not planned out in full. The creators have been very open about the fact that the first chapter was just made for fun, and they only kept going after it went viral and they decided to make more. By contrast, Poppy Playtime has had some level of planning behind it. Given the switching around of staff and writers, it's unclear how much of the original plan is still there, but I think it's encouraging that there was a plan at all. It gives me some hope that Chapter 5 will actually be something really cool and bring the story together in a way that's satisfying and interesting. It's something I'm very hopeful for, and also something that we'll just have to wait and see about. I was originally planning to wrap up the video here with a little speech similar to the one in my last video, where I talk about how I genuinely believe that Mob Entertainment has the ability to make something really cool, and I hope they just don't back out of it. But literally as I was writing that last paragraph, I saw that the Chapter 5 teaser released, and I don't really want to end this video on another "I hope this last chapter doesn't suck," so we're gonna have a look at this teaser really fast. It's not very long, but based on what we see, it looks very cool. The animations and environments look good as always, and it's very mysterious and intriguing. Originally, I thought this red goopy stuff was the remains of Doughy corrupted and changed after the prototype got a hold of them, but then I listened to some other theory people and they talked about Poppy Gel, and I realized that makes a lot more sense, so that's probably what's going on. Overall, it's a very short teaser, but one that gets me very excited. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the connection between Poppy and the prototype is. A lot of what I said in this video is based on the knowledge we have now. Chapter 5 could very easily introduce more characters that just explain everything I was having trouble with, and if that happens, then so be it. But no matter what, I'm looking forward to seeing what this new chapter will bring us. And I'd like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed listening to my various interpretations and theories, and I hope to hear from you as you tell me how they were right or so wrong. Be sure to leave a comment that says data so me and my husband can figure out this whole analytics business. And my last theory for this video that I'm slipping in right at the end is that Chapter 5 is not the last chapter like me and I think everyone is expecting, and after it comes out there's gonna be a bunch of videos talking about how Mob Entertainment is stretching the series longer than it needs to be on purpose. Thank you all so much for watching, and a special thank you to all of my patrons, including but not limited to Snake and Perplexia Sphinx. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!